My brother vanished the week before his trial. I was not prepared for what I'd find in his storage unit. Liam called me at work on a Thursday afternoon, saying our brother Garrett hadn't shown up for his pre-trial hearing that morning. The judge issued a bench warrant and Garrett's lawyer couldn't reach him. His phone went straight to voicemail and his apartment door was locked with lights off inside. My stomach dropped because Garrett was facing serious embezzlement charges, and disappearing right before trial made him look guilty as hell. I told my boss I had a family emergency and drove straight to Garrett's place across town. His landlord met me there with a spare key after I explained the situation. The apartment was mostly empty with furniture but personal items gone. His closet had hangers with nothing on them, and dresser drawers hung open showing empty space where clothes used to be. The bathroom had no toiletries, and the medicine cabinet was bare. It looked like he'd packed in a hurry and left sometime in the past day or two. I found a storage unit receipt on the kitchen counter with an address for Riverside Storage about 20 miles away. The receipt was dated 6 months ago and had Garrett's signature on it. I took a photo of it and texted Liam saying we needed to check this place out. Liam met me at the storage facility an hour later, looking as worried as I felt. We went to the office where a woman named Dorothy sat behind a desk covered in paperwork. I explained we were looking for our brother's unit and showed her the receipt. She typed into her computer and frowned at the screen before telling us Garrett had paid for 18 months up front in cash. That seemed weird since Garrett was supposedly broke from legal fees. She gave us the unit number and directions to Building C at the back of the property. The unit was one of those medium-sized ones with an orange roll-up door and a heavy padlock. Liam had Garrett's spare key ring from when he'd borrowed Garrett's truck last month. We tried every key until one clicked and the lock opened. The door made a loud grinding noise as we pulled it up, revealing what looked like a small office inside. There was a folding table with a laptop, 3 cardboard boxes stacked against the wall, and a filing cabinet with the drawers slightly open. The air smelled like old paper and something else I couldn't identify. Liam opened the laptop first, and it powered on without a password. The desktop had folders labeled by year going back 5 years. He clicked on the most recent one and found hundreds of spreadsheets tracking money movements between different accounts. Each spreadsheet had 2 columns labeled official and actual with numbers that didn't match. I started going through the filing cabinet while Liam studied the laptop. The top drawer had bank statements from accounts I'd never heard of. The names on the statements were people I didn't recognize, but the addresses were all Garrett's apartment. The second drawer had photocopies of checks made out to various vendors for Garrett's company. I worked in accounting, so I knew what I was looking at. These were duplicate payments for services that were never rendered. Each check had been cashed at different banks across the state. The amounts ranged from $5,000 to $30,000 per check. My hands started shaking as I realized this wasn't the $200,000 embezzlement case Garrett's lawyer had told us about. This was way bigger. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of everything. Liam found a folder on the laptop titled Insurance Policy that contained copies of emails between Garrett and someone named Vivian Ashford. The emails discussed transferring money to offshore accounts and creating false paper trails. Vivian's signature line said she was the CFO of Garrett's company. I remembered meeting her at Garrett's office Christmas party 3 years ago. She seemed nice and professional and nothing like someone who'd helped steal millions. One of the cardboard boxes contained burner phones still in their packaging, along with prepaid debit cards and fake IDs with Garrett's photo, but different names. Another box had passports from 3 different countries, all with Garrett's picture and various identities. The third box was full of cash in neat stacks of hundreds bound with rubber bands. Liam counted it while I kept photographing documents. He got to $47,000 before we heard voices outside the unit. We froze as footsteps approached our unit. A man's voice said something about needing to grab the package before heading to the airport. My heart pounded so loud I thought they'd hear it. Liam quietly closed the laptop and we backed toward the rear corner of the unit behind the filing cabinet. The footsteps stopped right outside our door. A key rattled in a lock that wasn't ours, and we realized they were at the unit next to us. We waited in complete silence for 5 minutes until we heard them leave. Liam whispered that we needed to call the cops immediately. I agreed, but wanted to finish documenting everything first. We spent another hour photographing every document, every spreadsheet, every email. I found a folder in the filing cabinet labeled Contingency Plan that contained detailed instructions for disappearing. It listed countries with no extradition treaties, instructions for obtaining fake passports, and a timeline for transferring assets offshore. The timeline ended exactly 1 week before Garrett's trial date. The laptop had a folder called Leverage that made my blood run cold. It contained files on various people, including judges, prosecutors, and witnesses. Each file had personal information, financial records, and in some cases photos of the people with their families. There was a file on Garrett's own lawyer with notes about gambling debts and an affair he was having with his paralegal. I realized Garrett had been collecting blackmail material on everyone involved in his case. I found Vivian Ashford's file, and it was thick with documents. Bank statements showing large deposits matching the amounts Garrett had stolen. Emails discussing their plan to frame the company's bookkeeper for the theft. Photos of Vivian meeting with Garrett at hotels and restaurants. The last email in the folder was from 2 weeks ago with Vivian saying she'd gotten cold feet and wanted to turn herself in. Garrett's response was chilling. He wrote that she'd regret it if she did anything stupid, and reminded her he had enough evidence to send her to prison for 20 years. Liam found airline confirmations on the laptop for a flight to Panama, leaving tonight under one of Garrett's fake names. He'd booked it 3 months ago, and the ticket was non-refundable. There was also a confirmation for a wire transfer of $2.3 million to a Panamanian bank, scheduled to process this morning. I checked the time and saw it was already 4 wow. The transfer had probably already gone through. We called the FBI because this was way beyond local police jurisdiction. I spoke to an agent named Calvin Briggs, who told us not to touch anything else and stay at the storage unit until agents arrived. He asked if we'd moved or removed anything, and I admitted we'd opened boxes and looked through files. He sighed and said that wasn't ideal, but told us to take photos of exactly where everything was positioned right now. We spent 20 minutes documenting the scene with our phones. 2 agents arrived 45 minutes later and immediately secured the unit. Agent Briggs introduced himself and his partner, Agent Pamela Frost. They had us step outside while they photographed everything themselves. Agent Frost interviewed me while Agent Briggs talked to Liam. She asked how we knew about the storage unit, and I showed her the receipt we'd found. She wanted to know if Garrett had any idea we'd be looking for him here. I said I didn't think so, since he'd left the receipt out like trash. Agent Briggs came over after finishing with Liam and asked if we'd be willing to make formal statements at their office. We agreed and followed them downtown in our separate cars. At the FBI building, we were separated into different rooms. A woman brought me water and said someone would be with me shortly. I sat there for 30 minutes replaying everything we'd found in that storage unit. My brother wasn't just a thief. He was a sophisticated criminal who'd planned his escape for months. Agent Frost finally came in with a yellow legal pad and a recording device. She read me my rights, even though I wasn't being charged with anything. Then she asked me to describe everything from the beginning. I walked her through finding the empty apartment, discovering the storage unit receipt, what we found inside the unit, and the timeline we'd pieced together from Garrett's documents. She stopped me frequently to ask specific questions about dates and amounts. The interview lasted 3 hours. When we finally left the FBI building, it was almost 9 at night. Liam looked exhausted, and I probably looked worse. We sat in my car for a while trying to process what we'd stumbled into. Liam said he'd always known Garrett was shady, but never imagined he was capable of something this calculated. I agreed, and mentioned how Garrett had been acting normal at family dinners up until last month. He'd even helped our dad fix his roof 3 weeks ago like nothing was wrong. Agent Briggs called my cell phone the next morning while I was getting ready for work. He said they'd executed search warrants on Garrett's apartment and his office at the company. They found evidence of a much larger fraud scheme involving at least $8 million over 5 years. Vivian Ashford had been arrested at her home and was cooperating with investigators. She confirmed Garrett had recruited her 4 years ago, with promises of a big payday if she helped manipulate the books. The company's bookkeeper they'd tried to frame had been fired 6 months ago and was suing for wrongful termination. Agent Briggs said they were also investigating Garrett's lawyer for potential ethics violations. The lawyer had never disclosed to prosecutors that he'd discovered evidence of Garrett's flight plans. He'd actually helped Garrett set up one of the offshore accounts according to emails they'd found. The State Bar Association was opening its own investigation. I asked if they had any leads on where Garrett actually was. Agent Briggs said they'd contacted Interpol and Panama's banking authorities. The $2.3 million transfer had been frozen before it could be withdrawn. Garrett's plane ticket was never used, and he hadn't left the country under any of his known identities. The next day, the story hit the local news with headlines about massive corporate fraud and a fugitive executive. Reporters camped outside our parents' house trying to get comments. Mom was devastated and kept crying, asking where she'd gone wrong raising him. Dad was angry and kept saying he wanted to find Garrett himself and drag him back to face justice. Liam and I tried to shield them from the worst details, but they saw everything on the news anyway. The company Garrett had stolen from released a statement saying they were shocked and cooperating fully with authorities. Agent Frost called me 3 days later asking if I'd be willing to meet with prosecutors. They wanted to prepare me as a potential witness if Garrett was ever caught and brought to trial. I agreed and met with an assistant U.S. attorney named Keith Wilkinson at the federal courthouse. He was young and eager and treated this case like it was the most important thing he'd ever worked on. He walked me through what my testimony would cover and assured me I hadn't done anything wrong by searching the storage unit. In fact, my documentation had been crucial for their case. Keith showed me additional evidence they'd found that hadn't been in the storage unit. Garrett had rented 3 other storage units in different cities under fake names. Each one contained similar documentation and cash. In total, they'd recovered almost $300,000 in physical cash and frozen $4.1 million in various accounts. But that still left nearly $4 million unaccounted for. Keith believed Garrett had stashed it somewhere they hadn't found yet. He said white-collar criminals often created multiple backup plans, and Garrett seemed to be particularly good at it. 2 weeks later, I was at work when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Garrett had been arrested at a motel in Nevada using one of his fake identities. A desk clerk had recognized him from news coverage and called police. He'd been living there for 10 days, paying cash and keeping to himself. When agents raided his room, they found another laptop with access to cryptocurrency accounts worth $3.2 million. He'd converted most of his stolen money to Bitcoin, thinking it would be impossible to trace. The FBI's cybercrimes unit had been monitoring blockchain transactions and tracked him down. Agent Briggs called to let me know they'd be bringing Garrett back to face federal charges. His arraignment was scheduled for next week, and bail would likely be denied given his flight risk. He asked if I wanted to attend the hearing. I said yes, because I needed to see Garrett face consequences for what he'd done. Mom decided not to go because she couldn't bear seeing him in handcuffs. Dad said he'd be there to look Garrett in the eye and see if there was any remorse. The arraignment was in federal court on a Monday morning. The courtroom was packed with reporters and people from the company Garrett had stolen from. Garrett was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit with his hands cuffed in front of him. He'd lost weight and had dark circles under his eyes. He scanned the courtroom and his eyes landed on me and Dad. His expression didn't change. No shame, no apology, just blank acknowledgement that we were there. The prosecutor read out the charges, and there were so many I lost count. Wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Each count carried significant prison time. Garrett's new lawyer entered a not guilty plea and requested bail. The prosecutor argued he was an extreme flight risk who'd already attempted to flee the country. The judge agreed and denied bail. Garrett was led back out without saying a word to anyone. Dad stood up and we left before the media circus started. Vivian Ashford's trial happened first, since she'd taken a plea deal to testify against Garrett. I was called as a witness to authenticate the documents we'd found in the storage unit. Her lawyer tried to argue she'd been coerced by Garrett, but the prosecution showed emails where she'd eagerly participated in the fraud. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The judge said her cooperation had reduced what could have been a 20-year sentence. Garrett's trial was scheduled for 6 months later. The prosecutor's office kept me updated on developments as they built their case. They'd found even more evidence of Garrett's schemes, including attempts to hack into the company's servers to delete records. He'd also tried to intimidate witnesses by sending anonymous threatening messages. Each new revelation made it harder to reconcile this person with the brother I'd grown up with. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I sat through most of it watching Garrett's lawyer mount an increasingly desperate defense. They tried to argue Garrett had been set up by Vivian and that the documents in the storage unit had been planted. But the prosecution had too much evidence, including Garrett's own emails and financial records. The cryptocurrency transactions were traced directly to him. His fake passports proved premeditation. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before finding him guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 months later. Multiple victims gave impact statements about how Garrett's theft had destroyed their retirement savings and forced the company into layoffs. The wrongfully fired bookkeeper testified about losing her career and reputation. When it was Garrett's turn to speak, he finally showed some emotion. He apologized to our family, but didn't address his victims. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison with no parole eligibility for at least 15 years. He'd be almost 60 when he got out. 1 year after finding that storage unit, I still think about all the warning signs I missed. Garrett had always been ambitious and willing to cut corners, but I never imagined he'd go this far. The company eventually recovered most of their money through asset seizures and insurance claims. Vivian Ashford is serving her time and reportedly teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates. Our family relationships are still healing from the betrayal and the shame of having Garrett's name associated with such massive fraud.